All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to this month's Repair Realm. And this month it's going to be the Ford exterior panel sectioning guidelines. So today we're going to be talking primarily about aluminum, but we'll also touch on some of the steel information as well because it's pretty similar. I am Scott Van Hooley with ICAR, and with me.
I'm Jason Hubble, one of the subject matter experts here at ICAR.
And joining us today is also Jerry Benanti from Ford. Why don't you give a quick introduction of yourself, Jerry, before we get going?
Thank you for having me, guys. I'm Jerry Benanti with Ford Motor Company. I'm a senior engineer for paint and body damage repair at Ford.
All right, and if you have any questions throughout the program, if you're watching this live, you can submit your questions in the tab to the right. And if you're watching it on demand, you can go to Repairers Realm at i-car.com to submit those questions, and we will respond to you. But with that, let's get the video started, and we'll start pointing out some of the differences in the video. All right, so just getting everything protected and getting everything started. That's something that you can never have too much protection on a vehicle that you're going to be working on for sure.
Yep, and don't forget often overlooked glass protection.
So, Jerry, when we're looking at where to section this, what are some of the things that we kind of have to watch out for that's in some of the repair procedures?
The key is we leave the repair procedure in the best cut place up to the technician's skill and, of course, how the vehicle is damaged. As you look at he's making the markings here, you want to stay 50 millimeters away from any striker or hinge point. And therefore, we pretty well meet industry requirements for staying away from those areas. The other thing you want to look at as you look at sectioning an exterior skin is really to determine the best place and the easiest place to work that area after you've welded it. And that goes for filling, for finish operations, sanding, everything that's related to the repair. So we leave it to the technician's judgment to make the best point of the section, naturally following the distance away from the striker and the hinge. But we really leave it up to the damage of the vehicle and what's the least invasive, the best way to repair it in the judgment of the tech. So kind of in a nutshell there.
Yeah, and you saw them using the file belt sander. That has been one of the greatest tools I think they have come out with in the last couple decades. With all the high strength steel, ultra high strength steel, aluminum, it's been a great tool for us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I can't imagine doing any of these repairs without one anymore.
I can't either. Even back as far as 2012, 2013, when we first started studying and working on actual trucks, the belt sander was a godsend. My 3M rep, Todd Corpy, came in with one, and I was like, thanks, that is the best present I've ever gotten, because it was like as I started working on the trucks, we were cutting rivets all over, and trying to drill them is not easy. Pressing them out with the approved tools, as you're seeing here, it works very well, but really when you're getting into a hard to remove area and you can't use the tool, the belt sander is a great solution for it.
Well, and I think one thing that I like to point out, anytime you're using any of these extraction tools or just the SPR gun in general, is that if you are off a little bit and on an angle, you can snap those dies very easy. And you really have to make sure you're not forcing anything because they're very strong but very brittle.
That's a great point, Scott. Yes, absolutely, especially on the removal. And the one thing that's always very, very clear as you're removing it, you're right, make sure that it's absolutely lined up because you will damage. It's a rather expensive tool, too. You don't want to hurt the bit if you don't have to. One thing, if I could call out here, you notice he's using the Steck panel chisel tool, and he's not heating the glue, which is the way that I've recommended in the past. Many times I've found as you're removing the joints, it works very, very well to do the sideways motion to it, and the glue simply fractures. That's what he was doing in that shot there.
Yeah, plus if you have multiple panels bonded together, you don't want to apply heat there either, because you're going to compromise the bond on the panels in the back.
Yes.
Well, and when it comes to removal, he's really taken his time too, using a lot of different tools, so we're not damaging those hidden reinforcements and things like that. There's so many reinforcements in these vehicles that, if you're cutting into them, you now have to do a much more intrusive repair, because most of those panels you have to replace if they're damaged, and that, when you cut into them like that, that is definitely damage.
Yes. Yeah, well said. Yeah, he's being very careful, and as you should with steel or any vehicle, there's always reinforcements and other things underneath. But the other side, I think what he's practicing here is just good craftsmanship. You just don't know what's underneath there until you start prying and pulling it away. But he's doing it very spot on right here.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that, a lot of times we're in such a hurry to get things done, but if you take the time to do it right and are careful with it, it actually will speed up that repair, where you can get it done more efficiently, because you're not cutting into those reinforcements, you're not breaking other things as you go, and or cutting it at the wrong location and having to get a different service part. So there's a lot of benefits to just knowing what you need to do and taking your time to do it right.
If you notice, he's maintained the original flutter foam right in the center of the picture there, below his Steck panel chisel there. You see that he's got the original flutter foam pretty well intact. And that makes for an easier repair when you're going back together. If you're not ripping and destroying everything as you're tearing it down. So it's a good thing. We do call out the foams in the workshop manual, but it's good that he works slowly. He's applying a little bit of heat here, I noted in my notes earlier, and sometimes it does help to give a little bit of application of it, in moderation, of course. Now he's pressing what's left of the original rivets through and drilling the holes for the hemlock rivets.
Yeah, these two that are by the NVH foam there, you can't really access the backside, so he opted to drill them, and then the bottom three, he can use the belt sander then to finish removing those.
Yeah, he's doing good here. Just tap him out.
And I've seen a lot of people not take the time to do that overlay on this. Some panels you can't, but this is a really good way to make sure that you're not cutting more than you should be, where all of a sudden now you're going to have a location that's short, because you don't want to try to magically make up an inch gap.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, you noticed, he gave a good 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch there, to give him some margin room for grinding as he fits the panel. And that's just going back to good craftsmanship and training, good shop hygiene as you're going into the repair. I don't know if hygiene's the best word, but I call it craftsmanship.
Yeah.
Once you cut one short, you try to avoid doing it again. I'll say that,
Mm-hmm.
And we've all been there, the time you get in a hurry or oops, made a mistake or whatever.
Yeah, you read the tape measure wrong.
Yeah, the tape measure was inaccurate,
Yeah.
So those were going to be the backers that he was just cutting there, and if it calls, the service information calls for 50 millimeter backers, so that's, the orange tape was 1.5 inches, the green tape is 3/4 of an inch, so if you cut on the inside of the green tape, and by the time you dress up your edges, you'll be right at that 50 millimeters.
And I
And
think
the
this,
fitting of the door is strong here too, because you want your panel gaps. This is your ultimate test of your craftsmanship. You want your panel gaps and your flushness, all your margins to be accurate. He's taken his time here. I really like how he fit it. He's doing a good job. And, You know, this is a popular repair. This is a very common repair to cab corners. Many times it can occur from different types of accidents, as we all know. But the ability to do this on this truck is a beautiful thing. You know, we tried to keep this truck as simple as we humanly could to make it repairable. And this shows right here, you know, you're looking at some very, very good options to repair it.
Yeah, and you know, and I think, you know, I want to remind everyone too that this isn't just on the F-150. You know, you on the outer unisides on pretty much all your vehicles, you can do a lot of the similar kind of repairs following the information in the OEM procedures.
Yes, to fully agree with that, Scott.
Yeah, because I know we get a lot of questions on Ask iCar where they're like, well, can I do this and can I not do this and that? And I love having those general guidelines for the industry because there's so many repairs that are just a gray area, and this really allows us to have some options to do different things. We're not locked into only doing one repair on a thin outer body panel.
One thing in this shot, note that reinforcement that he's standing next to there, the U-shaped reinforcement, that can be sectioned. That part may be sectioned if it were damaged right here. So just something to keep in mind. If this truck had some damage in that area of that U-shaped portion, that part can be sectioned. We actually cover that in the workshop manual as well. He's prepping the insides of the flange here.
And on that, you know, reinforcement where he's digging out the NVH material in there, that was a little bit of a challenge from what I understand, Jason.
Yeah, it was. We made it look real easy in the video, but it took a little bit of time. You know, it's that NVH stuff is a little bit harder than some that you might find. So it did take some time to dig it out of there, and then of course you got to get the backside nice and clean for your aluminum welds.
So interesting, useless trivia for you. Do you know why that NVH foam is there?
No.
Take a wild guess.
I don't think I should ever do that with anything that the OEMs do in the assembly line.
So if you're getting in the truck and let's say it's snow, you got snow on your boots or you got mud on your boots, right? And you've got your beautiful truck and you don't want to get in and get it all dirtied up or bunch of snow on the mats. A lot of people will kick their shoe on the edge of the rocker there. So I think we were finding on some vehicles early on that foam may not have been in certain areas of that rocker. And I believe we added that foam because there was some little dents getting in that area when people would be whacking their shoe into it. So commonly we will put foam in an area like that if we see that there may be situations where people unintentionally might damage it. You know, if you kick that with your boot and you got a steel tip work boot, you're going to probably hurt it if it didn't have a foam behind it. So it's many times foams are put in places like that to prevent damage, you know, from everyday use.
So with the backer plate, I know, you know, he's trimming off the flanges, and let's just spend a little time talking about, you know, what the backer plate is really there for, Jerry.
Really, you know, if you look at a butt joint with a backer, to me, and in talking with friends like you, Scott, and Jeff, and all the other team members there, you know, as we look at a backer, it's always the best way to go. Across the industry, it's always been recognized as the preferred method. You know, you're looking at really the best way to go. So that's why a lot of our procedures we recommend doing a butt joint with a backer. Now, can you do it on every location, every possible way? No. But when possible and when feasible, we recommend going that route. Now, you know, it's up to technician judgment and skill. If they're going to simply do it without a backer, just do a butt joint, you know, naturally you got to be a little more careful and cautious with it. But I think the backer gives the best plan for the repair, and at least in my humble opinion. You know, as we look at this, I think that's why we authored it that way. So.
Yeah, and you know, I think too, when you're welding, when they trim the flange off, you already have a built-in backer there when you're doing your weld. And so you only need it on that open area, so you don't have the large hump in the panel where if you try to have that flange with the backer on there, you'd have that bump. They would have to try to hide and things like that, where trimming that part of the flange off allows you to only put that backer where it's needed.
Yep, well said.
And here, a lot of times when you press out the SPRs, it'll leave a little burr on the aluminum. So what he was doing with the belt sander there first was just knocking that burr down.
And aluminum is especially important to have everything very clean when you're preparing for welds and things like that. But it's just as important on steel to make sure that you're not getting contamination in your weld zone and make those good quality welds.
Yes, absolutely. Getting the belt sander, what a wonderful tool, huh?
Yep.
We were doing quarter panels on my son's '69 Cougar. He's 13, and I was showing him all the techniques that you're seeing, in practice here, and of course in our industry. And as he started playing with the belt sander, he asked me, just deadpan, and said, "What did you guys do before this?"
Yeah, make
So
him do
I
it
said,
the hard
"Well,
way first."
Ben, yeah, we adapted." But it was funny because, he just goes, "What did you guys do without a belt sander?" I said, "Well, yeah, you go in with alternative ways, right?"
Yep.
Yep.
So
now, and before we started welding on the vehicle, we did do test welds. We just didn't put it in the video clip here.
sure.
So,
And we talk about MIG being the preferred method here. If a guy was proficient with a TIG, and if he chose to use a TIG here, we're not going to say you can't do it. Again, we leave it to his or her discretion and judgment. I know some people that are just absolute fantastic fabricators. My son-in-law is an ace fabricator and great with a TIG, especially on aluminum and stainless and all sorts of materials. And he joked me, he says, "I'd rather TIG weld it." I said, "Hey, you can. At Ford, we allow that, We do allow the usage of whatever medium in this situation that they would be comfortable most with.
Oh, that's good to know.
So, and this is one thing that we talked a little bit before. I had to learn that lesson the hard way, where you would cut it and think it's pretty good, but then you do your panel fit up and you'd have this wavy gap where when you mark it and grind down to it like that, you can get a much more consistent gap for your weld.
Absolutely.
And we'll cover this tool a little bit more. This is my first time I saw this little tool here, and it's my new favorite. So
Yeah, we'll show that in detail after the video's done playing. But
so why don't you just explain a little bit what it's doing on that?
well, it's called a duplicator tool, and it's got a pin on one side and a hole on the other, and you drop it in the rivet hole and then put your panel on there, and then the hole you can use to mark where to drill the hole for the rivet in the new panel, so that it goes right into the existing hole in the other panel, so you don't have to, you're not drilling through both and turning it kind of into Swiss cheese with extra holes and things like that.
Yeah. Note one thing here too, and that's a beautiful thing, isn't it? That's a slick little tool. Note the use of the Clayco. He had the Clayco hold in the panel there. We offered the Claycos in the repair kit box, the toolkit box that we offered through Rotunda. And I kind of insisted on the Claycos because in my earlier years, I lived in Wichita in Kansas. And when I would do bodywork restoration, whatever, I grew to utilize my friends were all bragging about Claycos. Go down to Boeing Salvage, pick up a box of these Claycos. You could buy them by the weight. So the aviation side has so many great tools when you're fitting very complex panels. And I like the fact that Claycos have gotten more of a kind of more of an attention over the years, because they're just a really underrated, very handy tool. I like this tool too. The punch tool is a really, really good time saver here as well.
Yep, absolutely.
And and I just like to call attention to all the panel prep and the precision on that. Like you talked about that craftsmanship, that really helps in the long run when you're trying to do all these different things and manage all this different information.
Yep. And here's this little graphic we put together is for just showing what you used for the different areas to prep that surface. We just used a red surface conditioning disc for the weld areas, so it would basically just remove the E-coat. And then it calls for 80 to 120 grit for where the panel bond will go. And we did that there. And if you see on the bottom there, there's two areas with an X. That's where there's a couple of drains between the panels. So we marked those so that we would not get any adhesive in there.
And
So this is an important point. Note that he's marking his rivet locations, and he's also putting down as far as the setting of the rivets. If you note that, what he's writing there.
Yeah, there's 5 different part numbers for rivets that are used for this.
Yes.
And so that's what the numbers represent. He was looking at the service information and then transferring it to the panel. The other thing he did was he was writing the number right above the original hole so that he knew to go to either side of that original hole when he put the new SBR in.
So an important aside here, there's a number of companies that are selling aftermarket rivets. You guys have heard me say this ad nauseum. They try to duplicate. They think that just a couple of rivets are going to take the place of all of our service numbers that we have. The truth is it's a pipe dream. It'll never happen. The key is, and there was a guy came up to me at SEMA. It was really funny. He seemed like a nice guy. You ever hear the joke that I'm YouTube certified? Well, he was YouTube certified. So he told me this story about doing repairs on our truck and how the fact that, well, you know what, you can put the rivets wherever you want to put them. Any rivet, anywhere you want to put it. And I said, no, that's absolutely wrong. And I advised him to take the video down as soon as possible because he potentially could have been into a very serious lawsuit, had someone been hurt with one of his repair guidelines. The moral of the story is go to the direct source, the Ford Motor Company's site, get the information for the rivets and where their locations are and the mandrels to set them from that workshop manual procedure only. Note here he's putting the adhesive on the original flutter foam to glue it back to the quarter section as he puts it in. We specify that in the repair procedure as well. You also notice that he had put the adhesive on the rocker base side there as well for the reinforcement. And as he fits it up, he's good to go. Rivets and Clayco. Well, he doesn't have Claycos here, but he's got rivets holding it.
Yeah,
looking pretty good, huh?
Yeah, and that's where all that prep ahead of time, marking everything out, making sure everything lines up, making sure your cut lines are, very accurate. Now when it comes to assembly, you have a limited time with the adhesive. There's a lot of benefits to taking your time to do it right.
Yeah, once you get that adhesive on there, it's nice to be able to just put that panel on. You know it's going to line up. You know everything's going to be where it needs to be. So you can just, that part of the process actually goes really quick because you've already did all that prep work.
When you do a whole body side, we're just seeing the cab corner here, but when you're doing a whole body side and you've got like a 9,500 degree day, you've got to move. You've got to have the mandrels ready to go. You've got to have your rivets ready. And I walked into a body shop in Metro Detroit here. A close friend of mine is the body shop manager, and he says, my guy wants to show you something. So he had the cardboard shipping box from the body side, and he had every rivet location with the mandrel. When he did the job he had just done on a truck, he marked it all off. Well, what happens is that if he does another job, and he agreed with me, he says, yes, I'll look in the workshop manual every time I do a job, because I know you guys change the rivets sometimes. So I'm like, perfect. You know, I said, you're going to be famous, I joked him, you know, but that's doing your job right. We would never do a cold spot weld. We would never do an inferior joint as body techs. And, you know, just some of what I narrated there really points to doing a safe repair, but also a very durable one as well.
Yeah.
So another interesting piece of useless trivia you could talk about at a cocktail party. Each rivet on this truck has to be removed from the structure and certified as the vehicle is being determined how they're going to build it. So if you can imagine, every rivet location has to be sawed in half, and the rivet is actually analyzed under a microscope to determine how it's spread, to determine how the mandrel worked. And you've got over 66 different rivets in the assembly of the F-150 and Super Duty.
You know, I think that goes to, you know, how are the, you know, OEM procedures developed, and there's just a lot of work that goes into it to make sure that, one, the vehicle is built correctly, but then for repairs, a lot of that same work has to be done, because a lot of times we're using different attachment methods in certain locations than what the factory did.
Yeah, at Ford, we have a manual that is written by the vehicle operations team. The vehicle operations team writes what's called the Weld Information Manual. Now, in this case, it's rivets that hold the truck together, same thing. So the Weld Information Manual is utilized when we author the shop manual. We look at that the WIM manual, the Weld Information Manual, and that's how we create the rivet counts, the rivet locations, and their mandrels that drive them. So it's very, very specific. It's very scientific. And, you know, like I told this fellow who was YouTube certified at SEMA that year, I said, you don't want to lose your business by putting it out there, wrong information. This isn't an all size, you know, one size fits all. The mandrels are very, very critical to the safe repair of the vehicle.
So,
and Ford rivets only. You'd be surprised. There's so much junk out there. These guys are selling, and they're saying they're as good as our rivets, and they're like, "Are you kidding?" You know, they don't even come near half, you know, of what the science that goes into the fitting of the rivets on the truck. They don't even understand it as they're selling them.
Well, I think that goes to, you know, people think, oh, it's just a rivet. You know, we're starting to see that in a lot of different makes and models where it was welded from factory. We don't have access. So even on steel vehicles, you're seeing where some blind rivets are used, but it's not just something, you know, from the hardware store. It's actually a structural rivet that's, you know, got certain requirements that need to be met. And so that's something that I think the industry needs to understand. It's, you know, it's not holding the window regulator in, you're holding part of the vehicle together with it. So it changes what the requirement is.
Yeah, not only part of the vehicle, but a lot of times it's the, you know, it's the collision aspect of it. It's all the parts of the vehicle go into that collision energy management.
Absolutely, Jason, you're totally right, both of you. And you know, I think the key is that when you go directly with the information that we have, and you stay with our rivets, you stay with our parts, you're guaranteeing, well, you're putting yourself in a much better position to do a safe repair. And to those vendors that sell the aftermarket rivets, shame on them. And I'll say that right to their face. I've argued with people over this. You know, I try to be a nice guy, but if you try doing something with an aftermarket rivet that isn't even near our specs, you're getting into a very serious, dangerous ground.
We had this little guy here. I actually made this out of an old feeler gauge set. You can buy these though, and we just didn't have time to get one. It's called a duplicator tool. It's used in aviation a lot, and it's exactly made for what we were doing with it. You put this end in the existing hole, and then put your panel in between, and then you can mark right here where the new hole needs to be in the new panel. It'll get you a perfect fit up.
So we
That's
need
a beautiful thing there, isn't it?
Yeah, we need about 100 of them now. And then we
Jason,
also
go to work.
we also had some of the test welds here, just to kind of highlight some of you can't just rely on the welder setup from the last time you used it.
Yep, exactly. So here's one. Here was a test weld that we did that looked all right at first. It had a good heat mark on the back, but it simply peeled apart. And so that obviously was not the correct setting for that welder. So then we messed around with the settings and came up with this one that had a perfect tear out. So then we knew we were right where we needed to be.
And this is something that Jerry, you talk about the rivets. I talk about this all the time. You have to do your test welds because you don't want to be test welding on the vehicle.
No, that's all got to be ironed out before you get to the vehicle.
A close friend in my position at another company said, "Do not make your customer a crash test dummy."
Very true statement. We do have a couple questions that came in. And so the first one is, can sectioning be done on steel vehicles following the OEM guidelines as well?
Yes, exterior skin may be sectioned according to the same repair plan and the needs of the vehicle and the technician's skill. He or she can make the judgment call as far as the best position to section the outer skin. They can go through and do the repair, do it in the least invasive manner. Some of the guidelines that we have in the workshop manual are basically, they're kind of suggested cut lines. They're not absolute, and you don't have to necessarily stay exactly to them when you're talking exterior skin. The rule is exterior skin, the tech may section as they see fit. Structure, follow our repair guidelines for sectioning guidelines of structural components, including frame rails, pillars, anything else that we have dictated in the workshop manual.
So, and the very next question, you kind of partially answered it, I think, but the question is, what's the purpose of the cut lines in the general sectioning procedure? So they have the outer uniside, and they show those kind of suggested cut lines. Just add a little clarification on that for the industry.
As you look at the general cut lines, we looked at ways that you're not getting into a complex, let's say like a dog leg, that's a tough area to cut. When you want to try to go a little further up the pillar, let's say, where there's less lines to deal with when you're finishing it and completing the repair. So some of those lines that we put in there were kind of just like initial judgments from looking at, reviewing, and what's behind, etc. But I'll say this again, the technician doesn't have to follow those exactly. When it comes to exterior skin, he or she may section it according as they see fit.
And just
staying 50 to 50 millimeters away from a striker or a hinge.
Yeah, and and clarify, these are on Ford and Lincoln vehicles. You can't apply this, what we're talking about here on other product lines. It's only for Ford and Lincoln vehicles. So the very next question, so there's a question on the Ford Expedition procedure calling for a specific rivet that the dealer can't locate in the system. My suggestion is send that into Ask iCar. So go to rts.i-car.com and submit the question there. We can look into it for you. And if we can't find the answer for it, we can reach out directly to Jerry and get that answered for you. But typically things like this, there might be something you're overlooking, or the parts department might not be looking in the right area. And a lot of times we can guide you to the correct location to find that information within Ford.
So about 6 or 8 months ago, there was a misprint in the workshop manual I noticed that I heard about, and we went ahead and we corrected. However, what we have seen, if you're using other brands of workshop manual, not necessarily Ford, if you're not going directly to the Ford workshop manual, many times they don't put corrections in, nor as quickly as we do. So that's why a lot of times we are suggesting in a very friendly way to utilize the Ford only manuals, because we do the updates very, very quickly. If we find a defect or something that was misprinted, perhaps, it could have been something somebody, fat fingered to put the wrong thing in there. So what we do is we correct that as soon as we can. But what I have found is that some aftermarket manual suppliers, they're taking a snapshot of our data. It may be 1 or 2 years old. So consequently, if you're looking at the Ford manual, I believe on Expedition Navigator, the one that you're talking about, we corrected from a concern that came in through Ask iCar, and Scott and I worked on that together. I got with the engineering team and we verified that, yes, that was an incorrect call out the engineer had made in the book. So we went ahead and corrected it. But if you're looking at, let's say, another brand of manual, you may not have gotten that correction. So just a thought. But either way, let us know if it is in the Ford manual. We have issues we have to address sometimes. So I'll freely admit that.
Yeah, but by submitting it through Ask iCar, if we've already answered that question, we can get that to you pretty quickly. And if there is still an issue ongoing, that's the best way to let the OEMs know, is to submit that question there. Next question we had come in is the rear body panel, inner and outer, considered an outer body panel on Ford?
Rear body panel is considered outer skin. The reinforcement behind it would be considered structural. However, when you look at certain things, like take a taillight pocket, many times it'd be easier to section it than get very, very invasive going all the way into the upper roof, let's say, on some of the SUVs. So sometimes we will say you can section those items, and that gets to be a judgment call depending on the vehicle and its damage.
So that one's probably a little bit more vehicle specific, and have to look at the repair procedures and see if there's any call out that allows for some of that judgment.
Yes, what happens is that if we get into something, Scott, you and I, and a technician saying, you really want me to remove the roof to do this part when I could section this down here, we will run that by, and we do look at possible workshop manual revisions as time goes on, because vehicles get damaged in the field and we may not see that necessarily when they're being developed. There may be a particular style of a kind of hit that occurs to a vehicle family. We may not have been able to see it happen that way. So consequently, we will work with the DNR, the design and release engineer, the crash safety team, and say, are you okay with us doing that? Most times they are. They look at the data and say, yeah, I'm fine with that. And that's when I get back to you, Scott. Yep. That's how it works.
Okay.
So.
All right. Well, I don't see any more questions coming in right now. Just remind everyone, if you're watching this on demand, send those questions into repairsrealm@i-car.com. And if there's no further questions, Jerry, thanks for taking the time today to work with us on this. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry.
Always. Thank you, guys. Yep, thanks for having me.
And just remind everyone, next month is going to be on the running boards on a lot of the Ford vehicles where the studs get torn out, and we're going to cover that, and it's going to be another great episode.
That's going to be a great episode. We get questions on that one, so look forward to being in that one.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun, just like this one.
Yep, looking forward to it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks.